Hello, podcast listener. Ring, ring. This episode of JJ Meets World is going to deal only with cell phone technology. We're going to talk about some fond memories we have of cell phones coming into the market and what they mean to us today. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of JJ Meets World, most likely on your mobile device. And by the way, if you'd like to help support our podcast, visit jjmeetsworld.com where you can donate to our Patreon, pick up some killer swag at our merch shop, or click the link to Apple Podcast and give us a 5-star review.
1, 2, 3, 4. J.J. Gordon, sort of like that Indiana Jones, in that he's always sniffing out his next adventure. Yes, he is. He's always interviewing guests so he can have them on his show and they can talk about pop culture, arts, and leisure. J.J. has his flag unfurled and he likes his french fries curled, and he's fun and then he twirled as he goes to meet the world. He will march into the rain even if his ankle sprained. Take a peek inside his brain. This podcast is called JJ Meets World.
The first time I ever saw a cellular telephone in person was my grandmother had a bag phone. When I say a bag phone, do you know what I'm talking about, Tucker?
Are you talking like a phone where you literally would carry it in a bag because you'd have to like sling it over your shoulder?
Right. And like this one, you had to have constant power to it. So you put it in your car and it fit in the seats between the driver's seat and the passenger seat. And you plugged it into the cigarette lighter and you unzipped it. And there was a headset with a cord that went down to like a box that had a dialing pad on it. And then like sometimes it even had an antenna that you had to suction cup and up on the roof. It was just the very beginning of cell phone technology, right?
Right.
And the thing I remember the most about my grandmother's bag phone was I don't think she ever used it. Not once, because you paid per minute and it was like hotel pricing for a phone. You paid like $2.99 a minute and she had it just in case there was trouble. Also, this is at a time when roaming existed. So if you were not within your direct cell provider's area, you were roaming, which meant that you were using another tower, which meant you were going to end up paying $5.99 a minute. Mm-hmm. And my grandmother, bless her soul, and I think she had a little Ford Taurus, kept that bag phone in her car until like 2004.
Okay. So she was paying for it
way
the whole
longer
time
than she should have.
So it was still being serviced and everything at that time, huh?
Yeah. And this is something I found out too. So I asked her why at one point, and she said all cell phones can still dial out to 911 whether or not you have cell service or not, or like a plan. So that was the first time I ever witnessed like a cell phone in person. I thought that was like really, I thought that was amazing. Like you can make a call from your car. That's amazing. And then I thought, well, what would be the reasons? Well, yeah, certainly if you're in an emergency, but like, think about it now. Think about today. People don't even have landlines anymore. They just have cell phones.
Right. It would be weird to see someone with a landline.
I do more talking to people on the phone in my car now than I do inside my home. The cell phone has changed our world. My first cell phone was a little tiny Motorola. It was a Motorola flip phone. And it would ring and you'd have to pull up the antenna. You'd flip it open and hit answer. And it just said call. It didn't say a phone number. It didn't tell you who was calling. It just said call. And the service on that thing was the worst. And my parents got it for me to keep in my car my senior year so that I would have a phone in case of emergencies.
Wait, they were like, you have this, but only keep it in your car?
Yeah. Like I wasn't supposed to walk around with it. Like I wasn't supposed to. And really, I wasn't supposed to give people the phone number to it. This wasn't supposed to be something that people were supposed to be able to get a hold of me on.
Okay,
because
so I'm guessing. Oh, got it. So like it only had like a few minutes on it anyways, and I'm guessing.
Right. Yeah. And like the idea was that if a friend needed to call me, they were going to call 232-5081, which is my home phone number. and then leave a message. This was for my parents in case I was, had gone rogue, that they could get a hold of me. And I only remember my parents calling me a couple times. And this is the other thing too. After 3 minutes, the phone was so hot, it felt like it was burning your ear.
Yeah.
And, from there, things changed. And in this episode, I thought it might be kind of fun to talk a little bit about old cell phones we had, because I think everyone has a cell phone that they consider like Tucker Prime. Like, this was the cell phone that you really felt, changed you. And I'll be honest, I was the person who waited until the very last second to start texting. People used to text me and I would get so pissed off about it because I didn't understand T9, where, it would figure out how to, like, what word you were trying to say. And I certainly didn't want to go through and like 123H, 123E, like that kind of garbage on a lot of these things. And so I put off texting for a very long time until I got this LG, and the LG was a flip phone only because it flipped open and had a QWERTY keyboard inside. Oh my God, that QWERTY keyboard was amazing. And the outside is where it had the dial pad, and you could click answer, and you'd make your whole call without actually having to open to where the QWERTY keyboard was. And that is the JJ Prime phone. That is the phone that defined me as a human being, because it allowed me to start texting, and I got into this new world of being able to communicate. I still don't text. Like, it took me a long time. It took me until I got my iPhone where texting was the primary mode of conversation. But this thing also allowed me to check my email, and I had 40 minutes a month of internet usage on this phone. And that was also something that sort of felt, what's the word I want to go for here? It felt like I was being given the keys to the kingdom.
Right.
I was allowed to go do something.
Yeah, you were in the future now.
Oh my God, I loved living in the future.
Yeah.
Future is where it's at.
Future's rad.
And then, like, I got an iPod Touch at one point, and which was just my like entry level to an iPhone. And the big problem with me when it came to iPhones was I was on Verizon, and Verizon was not the first network that allowed an iPhone, right? Like, so that was a big problem, is that I think they were exclusive to like AT&T for a while, if memory, and then Sprint got them, and I still was waiting. So it wasn't until like the iPhone 4 that I was able to join that revolution. Tucker, do you remember how old you were when you got your first cell phone?
I mean, it was right after high school. So I graduated in 2003, and it would have been that summer. My dad bought me and my sister each a cell phone, and we were on a family plan for a bit. And one thing is that the first thing that sticks out to me about this is that the phone number I have now is the phone number I got then. And I've had the same. Yep, I've had the same phone number since I got my first cell phone right after high school, and I aim to keep it, hopefully for the rest of my life if I can help it. I've always had it, and my sister has always had hers. And Brianna and I's phone numbers are only one digit different, so I can always remember her number if I need to. I don't remember anyone else's numbers anymore. Gone are the days of me trying to remember numbers. Right? They're just accessible everywhere. It makes you think about what things we do right now with our phones that in 5 years or even 10 years will go, well, I can't believe we used to do that. Like the notion that there were tiered plans for how much data you're using at all, I bet will become a thing of the past at some point. I remember how much we would spend on ringtones specifically, right? And it was a huge thing. Like there's that massive novelty phase when a new technology first comes around. And so the novelty phase, I think, of phones for us was almost like a 10-year period. And I just remember thinking, okay, I need to have a photograph of each person who's on my phone. So when they're calling me, their photo shows up. Oh my God, that'd be so amazing. And each person needs to have their own ringtone. So when I hear the phone, I'm like, oh, that's David Winterstein. Oh, that's JJ Gordon, right? And so there was a whole lot of what's modifying it, tailoring it to your own preferences that everyone was doing. And now I've gone in the exact opposite direction where I don't have a wallpaper on my phone. It's just black. I have it in a black case. I don't ever hear it ring because I always have it on silent. Vibrate is almost the thing that I always want to hear from it. So there's no one has their own special ringtones. And if people call me, it bothers me. I'm like, ugh, why are you calling me? You could have texted me. This could have been a digital thing that didn't even need to use the cell service to do it, right? Because like now the cell service is really there so that you have access to it when you're not next to a Wi-Fi port.
Correct.
But most of our lives we're next to a Wi-Fi port, except when we're in our car, at the grocery store or something. So even just that form of technology, I think, will become melded at some point. Like I think at some point we'll just be bathed in a worldwide internet connection that all devices can just connect to. And it's just, you're just connected to it. And that's it.
This is something that amazes me in the span of, let's say, 20 years. Okay. So let's go from 2002 to 2022. The leaders in the cell phone world have also drastically changed because let's face it, back in 2002, the king of cell phones was Nokia.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I remember our friend Dustin, like he had 3 different variations of Nokia, and they made a simplistic box phone that could contain a ton of, had a ton of ringtones, had a ton of space. I don't remember anyone ever like maxing out the number of contacts that they could have, and included the game Snake, which was the beginning of a new era for waiting.
Yep.
So when you were getting an oil change or something like that, now you had a device that you could use to play something that didn't make you look childish, right? So like back in the day, you could bring a Game Boy with you somewhere, but that made it seem childish. And it wasn't, now you had a phone and what you could do with that phone. I also remember too, I never had a Nokia, but my cell phone, my first couple cell phones, I remember being able to like charge those and only every 3 days.
Right.
Now, given I'm putting my modern cell phone into I'm calling upon it for a lot more stuff than I was, back in the day with some of that other stuff. But imagine having a charge for a long time. And do you remember the days when everyone had a different charger for it?
Yep.
So if you did not carry it with you, it's like, does anyone have a Nokia charger? Oh, that's too old of one. I don't. My little round barrel charging port won't accept that.
Yeah.
And then they would break too. The chargers would break all the time.
Yeah, the charging port on the phone was always for me the thing that would eventually bust on the phone. So like, because there was always some sort of tongue and groove thing that would have to connect together. And after so many ins and outs, that would just, become destroyed. And now we're to the point where I think iPhones even ship without charging cables right now. And at some point it will just be wireless charging too, where you're not even having to plug something in anymore.
Hey, let me tell you something. I use wireless charging at my desk at work and at my on my bedside table. I love it. The MagSafe charging is awesome. I love it. Love it, love it, love it. So when I think of the cell phones that I've had, I only had one that I feel was a major misstep. And also before I forget this too. So 20 years ago, Nokia, the king, right? And then BlackBerry becomes everyone had a BlackBerry who was in business, it was the cell phone of the business savvy individual, because they really pushed the fact that this has got email built in. It's got a keyboard right there. This is the cell phone that you want if you take business seriously. And BlackBerry, it had a huge chunk of the market. I want to say it probably had 50% or more of the market. And when was the last time you saw a BlackBerry today? I don't even know if the company exists anymore.
BlackBerry was the very first smartphone that I had because you had said earlier, we couldn't get iPhones in town because we didn't have the AT&T network that you needed to get on there. So my work at the time was hooking us all up with smartphones. So I got a BlackBerry Storm was the first smartphone I had, and I remember really liking it because it was a huge upgrade from what I was used to. And their whole thing was that when you would tap the screen, you would actually get kind of a haptic feedback in the monitor on your finger to kind of feel like let you know you pushed something. And that was supposed to be a big stinking deal. But there were no apps really developed for it because it wasn't like one of the cool brands. And the BlackBerry Storm, where I had that and the Storm 2 before I was able to get that upgrade to an iPhone. But yeah, I remember watching live the Apple event where they announced the iPhone and thinking, this is the greatest day of my life. I can't wait for this to come to Fargo. And then it was years later that it finally happened. It just broke my heart. It took forever.
And what was genius is at that point we were all addicted to our iPods, right? So we had already gotten so deep down the iPod rabbit hole, and the idea that we can hold thousands and thousands of songs in the palm of our hand, and now we can also make a phone call on it. What? Right. I think like there were a lot of things that really went into, the fact that Apple now dominates a cell phone market is not surprising to me. The biggest mistake I ever made is I remember spending $500, which at the time was enormous to me. I mean, it was insane on a phone that was made by oh God, what was the tech company at the time? It was like a Samsung phone, and it was a big LED, like LCD screen that you could push up, and it had a QWERTY keyboard. It had a nub at the top to act as the antenna, but it wasn't touchscreen. You had a stylus that you popped up from one side of this thing to be able to move it around. And this phone must have weighed, I kid you not, 3/4 of a pound or a full pound. It was the heaviest dang phone you've ever picked up in your life. And it took forever to charge, forever. And it had a proprietary charging block. Like it was a cord that you had to use, and like no one else's could work it. And I remember it was great because it unleashed the power of the internet. So they're like, you can order a pizza, get your movie tickets, all this kind of stuff. Well, all it did was have a web browser on it, and it was the crappiest web browser. I had this when I ran for mayor in 2006. And I remember thinking, like, I'll be the guy everyone takes seriously because he's the most tech forward of all of them. Well, that was the dumbest thing I could have ever thought at that time. Just utter and completely
I'm bound to be taken seriously.
And like one night I was running in I'll tell a story now. One night I had gone out with some friends, and we had gotten appropriately toasty, and I got out, and my friend was living in some apartments over by the interstate by Doolittle's. And there's a courtyard that ran between them. And at one point, I was convinced I was being chased by somebody, and it turned out to be our friend Natalie. And I fell down because the grass was like wet and dewy from the rain. And she had come over the top of me, and I full on kicked her in the chest and sent her flying in one direction. And I was like, don't take me, don't get me, don't get me, don't get me. And so people started coming out of their apartments onto the balconies being like, what's going on? And I remember our good friend Phil Lund, this is the apartment building that he lived in. People came out, they're like, be quiet. And I remember Phil yelling up, it's a Friday night, you shut up. Being like, it's Friday, you shut up. You don't know what you're talking about. It's a Friday. So it became this thing. Well, that phone fell out of my pocket that night, and the next day after it rained, I had to go find it in that field somewhere, and it had just enough of a charge to glow. And that was the first time I ever stuck a cell phone in a bag of rice, because that, of course, fixes everything.
Yeah.
I dropped a cell phone Memorial Day weekend. I had a cell phone I really loved, and it was late on a Friday, and I was walking with my sister and her now husband, and a rabbit popped out of this like bush by us and like lunged at Brady. Brady jumped, Chrissy jumped, I jumped. My phone was in my breast pocket. It shot out and hit the ground and just like shattered into a million pieces.
Oof.
And I remember the thing that I hated the most about that was like, well, now I don't have a phone for the weekend. And that was one of the first times that I really realized how much I do with my phone, because I couldn't text anybody. I couldn't call anybody. I didn't have anybody's numbers. I remember having to put a Zynga post out there being like, hey, if you need to hold me, here's my sister's phone number because my phone's broken. Womp, womp, womp.
Oh, those old days. Yeah.
And it was one of those like stupid situations where like the next day I remember going like, oh, listen, I got to get to a Verizon store so I can get a new phone. Well, here's the thing about Verizon and phones, and like let's talk about this. So they used to like give away phones, but I didn't understand why. Like every 2 years you used to be able to get an upgrade and they'd give you a new phone. Well, what they're doing is they're getting you to sign a new contract, right?
Right.
So they wanted you on the hook for 2 more years paying this amount of money. And clearly they were going to make back whatever whatever the price of the phone was. But I switched carriers at one point. So I don't have the first phone number that I ever had, Tucker, because my mom and I got into a big fight and she's like, well, like your cell phone is under the family plan. And I was like, well, forget you, Mom. And I went out and I went to a Sprint and I signed up for my own account and I got my own. And that's the phone number that I have today. And at one point I did go back to Verizon and I found out like, Congress doesn't do a lot to take care of me when it comes to like technology, but they did pass that thing that said like, listen, once someone has a phone number, they get to keep it. So if they move from one carrier to the other, you can't threaten to take away their phone number because they get to take it with them if they so choose. I think is a real classy move.
Yeah, I didn't know that was a thing that you were protected legally by.
Yeah. You're also protected legally on some other gouging things that they were getting away with in the early to mid 2000s.
Yeah. That doesn't surprise me. It was telecom companies. When you went iPhone, was there ever a period of time where you left the Apple sphere and went to the Droid sphere before going back to the Apple sphere?
There was only once. I remember leaving and getting an Android. I got a Samsung Android, and it was fine for what it was, but that was just when Apple was really making it easy to have all of your stuff like, play well together. So my MacBook could talk to my phone and share my same iTunes account, and, something I purchased here, and I could, back up my phone to my computer. And I have no problem with Android. I thought it was just fine, but it wasn't as stylish and it wasn't as cool as it was with the iPhone. And so I think I had the iPhone 4 and then maybe the iPhone 6. Then I went Android, and then I've been iPhone ever since.
When I did go Android for a period of time, and I got some sort of Samsung thing. I had 1 or 2 models, and I just did it just to sort of change things up a bit and try something else. But one day I was walking with some friends just down the street, and it was in my front pocket, and I wasn't watching where I was going, and I walked right into a fire hydrant. And where it was in my pocket hit like that bolt on the side of the fire hydrant, dead on, and just absolutely spiderwebbed the entire phone and almost bent it in half, because the Samsung phone was this like really flimsy, cheap, plasticky backing and phone. And at that point, I had been not liking it anyway, so I took that as the sign to leave Droid and go back to iPhone. And like that's the thing Apple does, where they make sure you are locked into their ecosystem, or not locked into it, but it's so easy to just stay in the ecosystem with all the other devices that it just sort of makes sense with an iPhone. Like, all my computers are Mac. And so if I take a photo on my iPhone, I can just easily airdrop it to a computer right next to me, which is pretty sweet.
Isn't it amazing how just the choice of the cell phone that you have can cause someone to like judge you. You know, they're like, "Oh, that's the phone you went for," and I'm like, "Yeah, I mean, this is the one I prefer." And I will also say this, because I prefer Apple products. That's just who I am, and that's what I know at this point. It's not that I necessarily think that it's a better machine in any way, shape, or form. It's literally, this is just what I know at this
Right.
point.
It's the flavor you like.
Right. That recently I was trying to help get troubleshoot some audio on an Android, and I'm like, I've got no idea what to do on this. You know, I've got no idea how the home bar is set up. I've got no idea, like, how do you find your settings on this?
Mm-hmm.
And to me, I'm utterly and completely lost. The same way I'd be that if you handed me like the third or fourth cell phone I ever used, I would be lost when it came to that as well. Cell phone plans amaze me too, because back in the day you dealt with minutes, right? So you've got 300 minutes of phone time to use during the month, and you've got 20 textual messages that you're allowed to send. And I remember when they got to the point of where it was unlimited, like unlimited voice. And then when you got long distance, that to me is the nail in the head when it came to landlines. Is that, well, why would I have a landline if I'm using my cell phone to call my family in Arizona and Florida and Alaska?
Right.
Because it's got unlimited like this. Why shouldn't I do this? But when you think, so I was recently talking to someone about just the average household budget in the United States and how it's changed. You used to pay $20 a month for a telephone service, and now you're paying $60 a month per member of your family for cell phone service. And you maybe replaced the landline in your house twice every like decade, and that's if you're like going from a corded phone to a wire, a wireless phone, and then someone accidentally, the dog chewed it up and you have to do it again. But with our phones,
do you remember how big a deal it was when we got caller ID?
Oh, like on phones or just like on your landline?
I mean, just on the landline, that was the first place you could get it, right? So that was just the concept that you would actually know who was calling before you picked up the phone. It used to be just a grab bag. It was like, oh, let's see who this is. No idea. Only way to know is to pick it up and to ask, right? Or to wait for it to go to the answering machine before picking it up.
And like, gone are the days of like, mom phone. and you'd have to like, you just yell from one end of the house to the other because you answer. I remember how I used to answer my landline, and I remember people being like, "Oh God, what a weird fucking kid!" I'm like, "Gordon's residence, JJ speaking. How may I direct your call?" Right. And also like, the thing about a landline is like, it's not private. Someone else, if they pick up the phone at the same time, they can now listen in on your call.
Right.
My mom used to wax philosophical about something called a party line that they had in the Lakes
I've heard
area.
about those. Yeah, my mom talks about that too.
Right? Like, what is it? Why are moms the ones? Yeah, I mean, it must have been like a girl thing, right? Where, oh, you chat with all your friends, which essentially has become the like Zoom of today.
Right.
If you want to get a bunch of people together in one communication style. The one thing that I think is interesting that cell phones never adopted that seemed like it would be a no-brainer to me is some kind of a chat room feature, so that you could be in a chat room and people could come and go like in a text message type thing.
I mean, we have that now.
Well, we have group texts now, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But like, it's not the same as like an active conversation when like, oh, Tiffany has entered the room.
I see what you're saying.
You could do stuff like that. Also, by the way, group texts are the stupidest, dumbest thing in the world when you're not interested in what's being discussed.
Yeah, I don't. I really, for group stuff, I don't even use texts. I'll use like a different app, like Telegram or something that's a little more, just better at doing that kind of stuff. But I feel like now that we've got a million different ways to basically do the same thing, now it's really just we're kind of sort of which Which user interface do you prefer? So
right,
I
which
know
will
that
come out as the king.
right. So like when I'm in contact with you, you and I text message. Same thing I do with my parents. A few people I know who are good friends of mine, they primarily use Facebook Messenger. And that's where I talk to them at. A few of my other friends, they're almost exclusively Telegram, and I communicate with them regularly. So I'm on Telegram to talk to them. And then a couple buddies like will send me messages as well on Instagram or some other social media app, just because they want to send me a meme or something like that. And so all of these different platforms effectively do the same thing. They can all send text messages. They can all send photos and videos and audio files. They can also, almost all of them can do live conversations as well. They're just sort of different names and different style sets and have different kinds of encryption on the back end.
Do you ever get into Discord?
That I also, yeah, that's right. I use Discord to have communication with some people. I use Slack for work. It's endless chatter.
Okay. Do you remember for a brief minute, and I can't remember what cell phone provider it was, but they had a cell phone that also had like walkie-talkie capabilities built into it. So it wouldn't use any minutes, and you didn't need to be like in cell service, but you could use the walkie-talkie aspect of it to get a hold of someone else who had the same, was on the same network essentially.
Okay. No, I wasn't aware of that.
Oh my God. Okay. So my friend Travis had one of those. And so he was like, yeah, this is the next generation, man. This is where it's at. And so they had this walkie-talkie thing. And I said, well, yeah, but you need to know people who have the exact same phone. And I guess it worked out for him because his company bought them phones. And so he could talk to like somebody else at the same company if he needed to. But it wasn't going to help like in his conversations with me. You know, I wasn't going to, yeah, come on. I wasn't going to be able to hear what he had for that. Now, this same phone that he had that, like, I remember we were partying at a friend's house in Minneapolis, and he was gloating about how this had military technology built into it. And it was indestructible. So, like, he said, like, they showed a tank running over this thing and it didn't break. And you can drop it from like 5 stories and it won't break. And like, this thing is just amazing. And we're like, yeah, right, whatever. No, it's just a phone. And he goes, no. And like the outside was rubberized and stuff like that. So he chucks it off the 2nd story balcony of this place and into the street. And we just hear the sound of plastic going everywhere. So he gets down there and, you know, the screen like was completely shattered. The back end was just like gone. There were buttons missing. And so he was really pissed. Now, here's the thing that he should have thought of. He got that, like his company got that, not at a cell phone store, but a kiosk in the mall.
Right.
So a company that's so they can't even have a storefront, but they can afford a 4x4 kiosk the same way the peanut brittle lady can.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like, that should have been a clear indicator that this was maybe not the quality product that you thought you were going to get.
I remember when people were just up in arms that Apple would release a phone with like only one button on it. And how a lot of there was a lot of chatter of this will never work. Your fingerprints are going to be all over it. It's going to scratch, you know, and a lot of that those things were true, but we ended up adopting it fully. So now the notion of having buttons on your phone, apart from on the sides where you might be doing volume or something, it seems silly. But I remember when that was a huge thing, like there's no way this would ever work. And it ended up being the most sort of intuitive way to use your phone we've come up with so far, except now that there's so much more voice command options in phones. That's one of the primary things I use my phone for now, is almost like a personal assistant type thing versus just a phone, because all the things my phone can do, the computers I'm at can do as well. And since they're all in the same, you know, they're all connected, I can do all my text messaging and everything from the computer. So I don't actually even need to carry the phone with me. But the phone is the only thing that I have Siri activated on. And so I'll use that for just simple stuff like weather checks, time checks, setting timers, setting reminders, things like that. Or also if I'm calling someone or texting someone, oftentimes if I'm texting someone, I'm doing it while I'm driving. It's completely voice the way I'm doing it, so that I'm not even having to take my hands off the steering wheel. And I really wish I could tell it to change its name to computer so that it would just be like in Star Trek. Like the only sound it ever makes when I have the sound on is the little sound that like the Star Trek tricorder or their little comm badge makes.
I don't know if I guess people really realize how many industries the cell phone industry has disrupted and essentially destroyed.
Mhm.
Because this is the way I'm thinking about it. So it's killed the landline. The only places you see landlines nowadays are businesses, right? So I still have one at my desk, but I'm pretty sure that is probably not long for the world as well. Cell phones. So hotels used to make a ton of money off of charging people for phone calls. That has disappeared completely now.
Mhm.
So when was the last time you used a phone at a hotel? Like, I don't even use it to call to the other rooms to be like, listen, are we going to go get pizza or what? I send a text being like, meet in the lobby, we're getting pizza.
I bet it's been 15 years since I've done that.
Right? Cell phones have disrupted. Okay, here's another thing too. When they added a camera to phones, everyone used to, like, for a while, used to have like a camera that you loaded film into, and then the digital revolution happened. But nowadays, I can't think of a consumer who still owns a regular, like a digital camera, unless you're doing high end digital photography, and in which case you're not carrying that with you all the time. You're relying on your cell phone. And I know really your cell phone is really pushing for professional photographers saying like, listen, what can we do to get rid of that bulky Canon from around your neck? What can we do to get rid of that? The way photography is done, and certainly the way that industry is. I mean, I had several Canon cameras over the years that at one point my cell phone just started taking better pictures and I didn't have to worry about it, and the memory was bigger inside of it, and it's just done. I don't need to use a digital camera anymore. It's already built into this device I'm carrying around already. And that had to have been a multi-billion-dollar industry that just is poof, gone because cell phones took it over.
Right. Well, and I mean, it has really, what you should think of it as now is not a phone. It's really a computer that has phone technology in it, but it's a computer, right?
Yeah.
It is a computer. So it then brings with it all these other tools that a computer can do. It just unlocks the world for you. The amount of power that we have in our pocket. And the thing is that we're so used to it just being this device that entertains us, that imagine the amount of things we actually could be doing on it throughout the day that a previous age would have only dreamt of, right? The kinds of, I can have streaming video conversations with my nephew in Arkansas or someone on the other side of the planet, and it's crystal clear quality. Like, that used to be completely nonsensical to think that would even be possible.
Well, let's go one step further. This is the biggest FU to every math teacher on the planet who used to tell us you're not going to walk around with a calculator in your pocket.
Yeah. You're going to walk around with an entire computer in your pocket is what you're going to do.
Right. Like, it's not even it's not even like that I have like a calculator. I have something that if I don't even understand the problem at hand, I will just put it into the internet and have them fix it for me.
It does become sort of a non-grafted on extension of ourselves, in that we can use it to perform complex math. We can use it to translate language in real time. We can use it to access the world computer of stored knowledge just about anywhere. We can use it to, in real time, have a face-to-face conversation with anyone else on the planet. It's absolutely insane, and it makes me wonder, where could it possibly go after that?
Well, and they're trying to figure out what the next step is, and maybe even a half step. But when you look at things like smartwatches, where they're saying, listen, you don't even need the bulky phone anymore. You know, like you keep that at your desk and now we can just have a watch that you use for this. I think the advancements with medical technology in our cell phones, now that we're carrying around something that can monitor and data track things like, oh, how many hours did he sleep last night? How's his heart rhythm at this point? I think that will be, you know, the next massive piece that we use when it comes to our phones. And clearly, like, Apple's thinking about that, right?
Right.
How can we ensure that if you're going to have a heart attack, your phone is the first to know?
Right.
I also think too, the app industry is interesting because the small micro payments we used to make for things like ringtones. You know, ringtones used to be 99 cents. And you used to remember thinking like, oh, God, do I want to spend 99 cents for a ringtone? Here we go. They must have made millions and millions off of people buying 15 seconds of a Jason Derulo song so that they could have it as a ringtone in there. And I always wondered too, like when you buy a ringtone, I bet you artists weren't getting a cut of that buck. You know, I bet you that's another way the music industry was disrupted.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Now, if someone wanted me to pay for a ringtone, I would just laugh. And even at the thought that I would want to hear my phone ring in the first place.
Right. I make more I cut stuff up audio wise so that I've got like a tone that wakes me up. So like I use my phone as an alarm clock. That's another thing too. The alarm clock industry gone. No one's building alarm clocks anymore. Sorry, Sanyo, you're done. We're only going with cell phones these days.
Can you imagine like someone who's talking to their investment manager, you know, like the late 90s and like, all right, what's our portfolio looking like? Well, we've doubled down on Blockbuster, alarm clocks, and calculators. I think we can only go up.
Future-proof industries. You're good work,
you are
Jenkins.
Officially diversified.
Say, I also heard about this fire festival we should invest in. Also, when it comes to things like, it's funny to me about how like their apps, like you said, it's a virtual assistant that run your life at this point. But there have been a lot of apps, especially at the beginning, where they were like, "Oh, we got to get an app out there, just for something that like doesn't make sense and is kind of bullshitty." And so, like, I remember Bic, like the lighter company, pens and lighters, put out an app that was a virtual lighter that if you were at a concert, it would have a picture of a lighter and you'd swipe the screen to like, flick it. And then it would turn on, and then you could still have that like look of a lighter lighting up at a concert. And now, have you ever seen this? Like, have you ever seen a place where they put out an app for a concert, like Taylor Swift, let's say? And so you get your phone out, and it communicates with all of these apps, and it knows where you're seated because the app has your seat number, like in your ticket, like information built into the app. And so it'll change the lighting in a section based on this, and it'll like work in waves. And so it brings some of the technology of the tour directly into your hand and into your pocket. And so now people are bringing a device that essentially is part of the showmanship of these things. That is just friggin' amazing. Here's another thing that cell phones have disrupted: the ticket industry. So back in the day, when you would get a ticket to a show, they would print it out and then you'd have your tickets. You could also have them at will call. And then for a brief time, we were printing them out on laser printers, 20 pages a piece, because there were ads and your computer didn't know how to read it. Nowadays, Ticketmaster doesn't even want to, they're going to charge you like $10 a ticket to print you a physical ticket. And in some cases, they just don't even exist. And it's all via a mobile device, and you have to bring your phone. And so if I bought a ticket and I was like, oh, I can't go to the show and I want to give it to you, Tucker, I now have to use the app to transfer it to you. And in some case, pay money to transfer it, even though I own it, to be able to get it to you. it's amazing because it's almost completely stopped the scalping industry. So the people who are out there buying tickets and then charging 10, 20, 30, times the ticket price, you can't do that anymore. Nowadays, like when you buy tickets to a Garth Brooks show, it goes to the cell phone that you want, and then you've got to stand, and that's the only phone that can enter with them. So like you've got to be there with your whole group, and you all have to enter at the same time and show a photo ID. And if you want to sell one of those tickets, like to somebody, your aunt can't make it, that person has to be there. That stranger has to go through the turnstile at the same time that your whole party does. And I think that is something that is nothing short of amazing. And, Ticketmaster used to have this huge footprint where they would be inside of Macy's, and, the Civic Center would have to open early because they had a Ticketmaster window. And now these things just don't exist. I mean, when was the last time you bought a ticket to an event and actually went to physically get them from somewhere? I know the last time was 15 years ago when the Trailer Park Boys came to town. I remember going to a physical ticket kiosk because someone had tipped me off that usually you can buy tickets there like 5 minutes before they go on sale to the rest of the the crowd, or to online, excuse me. And that was a huge deal. Now they don't even bother putting up ticket kiosks. And so another thing that because everyone is expected to have a cell phone nowadays, you've got it. And while I'm on this rant, I talk to parents all the time, and it used to be like, I'm only going to give my kid a cell phone when they start driving, because that way, it's for safety and I can get a hold of them. And, if there's an emergency, they can get a hold of me. And then it became, well, I'm going to give them a cell phone when I start trusting them to go to places without adult supervision. So, by the time they're 13 and they might be able to go to a movie by themselves, I'm going to make sure that they've got a cell phone. Nowadays, I swear to God, I think kids are getting cell phones at like age 10.
Yeah, pretty young for sure.
Do you remember do you remember the time when you didn't need to worry about cell phones in a movie theater? Like how glorious that was to go to Jurassic Park like in 1993 and not have to worry about someone's cell phone going off in the theater, or somebody even worse. I see people who are checking Instagram or Facebook or their email, and I'm like, light pollution, guy. That's, you're ruining this for everybody. It's one thing if your phone goes off because I can instantly like kind of get away from that. But if your phone is glowing two rows away from me, that drives me bonkers. I hate that.
I've also been wondering about, with movies and tickets, you used to be collecting your ticket stubs of the movies you'd go to. And I'm guessing is that over for you now? Do you just no longer add to that collection?
So when I go, you can request sometimes that they print a ticket. Like I've been to a couple theaters, like when I go to the cities or something, and request to get it printed. I still go wait in a line every now and then and buy a ticket. But yeah, you're right. So like when you and I went to see Sonic 2, those were just digital tickets. And so I won't be able to add to my collection anymore, which is sad. It's a very sad state of affairs for us that at one point I just don't have ticket stubs anymore. And like, I used to have giant, like when Star Wars or Lord of the Rings would open, I'd have a giant stack of tickets, and now I just have a bunch of QR codes.
Do you know how many tickets you collected?
No idea. I know my earliest ticket is an Aladdin Mighty Ducks double feature at Safari. Wow. Yeah. And nice. You know what's neat is, so you watched Aladdin first, and then there was, the famous like Mickey watches where his arms are, like one arm is long and it points to the minutes. And so it was like a 30-minute reel of just that watch face with him, like, counting down 30 minutes until showtime. They got to watch another one. I remember at that specific instance, I went with my friend Andrew, and his mom went to a Hardee's that was across the street and snuck us in Hardy burgers. And I'd asked for mine plain, and she didn't get mine plain, and so it had mustard on it. And so it had all the ingredients: mustard, ketchup, pickles. And so I refused to eat it, and she said, if you don't eat that, we're going home. And I remember having to choke it down because I was with like 4 other guys and just being miserable about it. And I if I could go back and tell little JJ, be like, listen, take that crumpled up $2 that's in your pocket and throw it in her face and tell her you eat it.
What was the movie that you snuck in the Burger King double cheeseburgers and surprised me at? I was going to do it and then decided not to, and then you did it.
Yeah. It was at the Century Theater.
What movie was
I can't
that?
remember. But yeah,
That was a good memory.
I used to like, but I will always justify it with this because people are like, you snuck stuff in. I'm like, yeah, but then I also bought popcorn too. So don't worry. Like, it's not like.
Was it Pink Panther?
No, we saw Pink Panther. I'm pretty sure at West Acres.
Okay.
Because you and I had this little thing for a while where we went to movies like on Sunday nights. Do you remember this?
Oh, vaguely. Yeah.
On Sunday nights, and we saw some movies that were like surprisingly good. Like when we went and saw Looney Tunes Back in Action, and we were like, that wasn't horrible. We thought it was going to be garbage, but Steve Martin really saved that. That can't be said about the Pink Panther, though.
Yeah, no. I only hit matinees now if I can help it. Typically, when I go to movies.
I remember the first time I was able to buy movie tickets on my phone, and I did think that was pretty cool. And this is another example too. Like, I call it my phone, but you're right. We do need a new 21st century name other than mobile device, because I think that sounds stupid.
Right.
To call
it's just a mini computer.
Like, why can't we call them vocoders, right?
There you go. We should call them bag phones.
Bag phone. The Alice Gordon bag phone.
You know what this is making me think of? It's making me think of the scene from the Beverly Hillbillies movie when they're in the limo and she's talking.
Jane Hathaway is on the phone.
Yeah. And Granny's like, she thinks she's talking to someone. There's no cord in it.
There ain't even no cord there. Boy, talk about 2 women, Cloris Leachman and Lily Tomlin in that movie together. Great casting. Wonderful casting.
That's a good movie.
Directed by Penelope Spheres, who hates Mike Myers. There's a little fun fact for you right there.
Why did she hate Mike Myers?
Because apparently, so she worked on Wayne's World and Wayne's World 2, and apparently he's such a huge creative suck of energy that she's like, nope, just you can drive $1 billion worth of pennies up to my house and I won't accept it. All right, well, listen, as we wrap up this conversation on cellular devices and telephones and whatnot, it does make me think about, I do yearn for the time. I was doing a Saturday shift at my day job, and my partner brought in her son, and he's a little guy, and he looked at a telephone that was in the studio, and he goes, what's that? And I said, it's a phone. He goes, no, it's not. And I'm like, yeah, it's a phone. Like, you hold this up to your ear. And he went, hey Siri, and nothing happened. And it made me think, I was like, yeah, we've got whole generations of people who aren't going to understand things like the opening of Scream, right? They're not going to understand things like Rear Window when they're trying to get to the phone, and it's or what a payphone is, and why, if you were going to do something shady, you made sure to use a payphone instead. So I'm very happy that we have these things, because I rely on it a lot. I rely on it, in fact, so much so that I was watching an interesting little YouTube thing where they were offering people free admission into this museum in Stockholm if they would be willing to put their phone in an armored box, and so that they couldn't have it while they're inside the museum, and then they could have it back later. And it was shocking. Like 80% of people would rather pay $25 to get into the museum and still have their phone on them than those who don't. And then they tracked the people who had their phone, and most of them didn't use it once. It's not like they're taking it out and taking photos, or they had a call. They just didn't want to be without this thing that they felt made them whole.
Yeah, it feels weird when you don't have it. It feels like you're missing a limb sometimes.
Yeah, it's just bizarre. Just wild, crazy stuff. I mean, I also think that putting a cell phone into a movie or a television show is instantly going to date you. So please, if you can avoid it, like find other ways to make phone calls happen. So I don't know what that is. Maybe people just start proclaiming their love from the top of roofs more often rather than using a phone.
Just go back to carrier pigeons.
Oh, I love that idea. I don't know if those things actually worked or if that was just a Hollywood trope that we assume works, but I would love to send you a message by carrier pigeon right now, because I'd have to be very precise on what information I wanted to share with you, because it had to be able to fit onto the small collar I was going to put on the pigeon's leg. That's going to wrap it up for today's show. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to help us continue to produce new episodes each week, visit jjmeetsworld.com, where you can donate to our Patreon, pick up some swag at the merch shop, or follow our link to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star review. You can also follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, all the sites the cool kids are using these days. JJ Meets World is produced every week by Tucker Lucas. You can find out more about Tucker's work by visiting moonbasemaria.com. If you want to get in touch with your host with the most, check out linebenders.com, where you can find direct contact info for JJ or booking information. I have one time in my life purchased a burner phone, but it's not what you think. It has nothing to do with drugs or infidelity or anything. I simply bought a burner phone because I needed to call an ex-girlfriend and I didn't want her to get my current phone number. Here's what is the downside. I have my real cell phone number listed as the Linebenders phone number all over the internet.